In this tutorial video, we're going to learn how to use useCallback and useReducer hooks in ReactJS to create a page that displays a count and a message based on that count. Let's start by defining the initial state for our reducer. Our initial state has a count property set to 0 and a message property set to an empty string. Next, let's define our reducer function. Our reducer function takes two arguments, state and action. The state argument is the current state of our application, and the action argument is an object that describes how we want to update our state. In our reducer function, we use a switch statement to check the type property of the action object. If the type is increment, we return a new state object with the count property incremented by 1 and the message property set to a string that describes the new count value. If the type is decrement, we return a new state object with the count property decremented by 1 and the message property set to a string that describes the new count value. If the type is reset, we return a new state object with the count property set to 0 and the message property set to a string that says the count has been reset to 0. Finally, if the type is not recognized, we throw an error. Now, let's define our component. Our myPage component is a functional component that returns some JSX. Inside our component, we use the useReducer hook to create a state variable called countState and a function called dispatch. CountState represents the current state of our application, and dispatch is a function that we can use to update our state. Next, we use the useState hook to create a state variable called inputValue and a function called setInputValue. InputValue represents the value of an input field in our form, and setInputValue is a function that we can use to update the value of this input field. We then define a handleSubmit function using the useCallback hook. HandleSubmit is a function that gets called when the user submits the form. It prevents the default behavior of the form, which would cause the page to reload, sets the value of the input field to an empty string, and dispatches an action to increment the count. We pass the handleSubmit function to the onSubmit prop of our form, so it gets called when the form is submitted. We then render a hone element that displays the current count, a p element that displays the message associated with the current count, a form with an input field and a submit button, and two buttons, one to decrement the count and one to reset the count to 0. When the user enters some text in the input field and clicks the submit button, the handleSubmit function gets called, which sets the value of the input field to an empty string and dispatches an action to increment the count. This causes our component to re-render, displaying the updated count and message. When the user clicks the decrement button, an action to decrement the count is dispatched, causing our component to re-render and display the updated count and message. When the user clicks the reset button, an action to reset the count to 0 is dispatched, causing our component to re-render and display the updated count and message. And for the end, I will add some styling so the inputs look good. This CSS creates a card element with a shadow effect and applies some styling to the form elements inside it. The label elements have a bold font weight and a margin bottom of 10 px, and the input elements have a margin bottom of 20 px to create some spacing between them. The submit button has a blue background color and a hover effect to make it more noticeable. You can adjust the values and colors to match your design preferences. And that's it. We've used useCallback and useReducer hooks to create a simple page that displays a count and a message based on that count. I hope this tutorial was helpful.